whiskey-soaked piano music died the moment Scarlett Rose walked through the swinging doors of the dusty Rose Saloon, her crimson dress torn at the shoulder and her lip bleeding from where Mayor Craddock's son had struck her for refusing his advances. Old Tucson, Arizona in 1876 was not a forgiving place for women who worked in saloons, and Scarlett had learned that lesson harder than most in her 22 years of living. She pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, tasting copper and shame, while the other girls gathered around her with worried whispers and gentle hands that guided her toward the back room where they kept the medicinal whiskey and clean rags. "You cannot keep refusing him," Martha said, dabbing at the cut with trembling fingers. "He will kill you next time, Scarlett. Men like that, they think we are property, nothing more than painted dolls for their entertainment." Scarlett pulled away, her green eyes flashing with defiance despite the pain radiating through her jaw. "I would rather die than let that pig touch me. I sing, I pour drinks, I smile when my feet ache and my heart is breaking, but I will not do that. Not for him, not for anyone, unless I choose it." The words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Every woman in that room knew the precarious line they walked between survival and destruction. They were saloon girls in a frontier town where respectability meant everything, and they had none. The decent women of old Tucson crossed the street when they approached, clutched their children closer, whispered behind gloved hands about fallen women and the wages of sin. "No decent man wants a saloon girl," Martha said softly, repeating the phrase they had all heard 1,000 times. "That is what they tell us, what they make sure we never forget." Scarlett stood, smoothing her torn dress with shaking hands. "Then perhaps I do not want a decent man. Perhaps decent men are the problem." She did not know then how prophetic those words would become, or that the mountain of a man who would change everything was already riding toward old Tucson with a string of pelts across his horse's haunches and a heart that had never learned to judge a woman by where she worked. Harrison Thorne was 3 days out from the high country when he saw the smoke rising from the desert floor. He had been trapping in the Catalina Mountains for 6 months, living rough and alone the way he preferred, speaking only to his horse and the occasional prospector desperate enough for company to ignore his intimidating size. At 6 feet 5 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway and arms thick with muscle from years of hauling traps and splitting wood, Harrison knew he made most men uncomfortable. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was trimmed but substantial. He had scars on his knuckles and a face that would never be called handsome, but held a certain rugged honesty that made animals trust him and men step aside. The smoke told him old Tucson was close, and while he generally avoided towns, his supplies were low and winter would come eventually even to Arizona. He needed ammunition, salt, flour, and perhaps a few nights in an actual bed before heading back into the wilderness. Towns made him feel caged, all those people pressed together with their rules and their gossip and their endless need to explain how a man should live his life. But necessity drove him forward, and as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold, Harrison guided his buckskin mare down the rocky trail toward civilization. Old Tucson sprawled across the desert like a handful of dice thrown by a careless gambler. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more grandeur than they delivered. Harrison counted 2 saloons, a general store, a hotel, a blacksmith, and the inevitable church perched at the edge of town, like a stern judge overlooking a rowdy courtroom. He rode slowly, aware of the stares that followed him. Mountain men were not uncommon, but he was uncommonly large even among that breed, and the pelts tied to his saddle marked him as successful in a trade that killed more men than it enriched. He stabbed his horse at the livery, paying the bow-legged old man who ran it with coins from a leather pouch worn soft with age. The old man counted the money twice, eyeing Harrison with a mixture of respect and wariness. "You need supplies. The general store closes at sundown," the old man said. "You need a drink and entertainment? The Dusty Rose is the better choice. Cleaner girls, better whiskey." Harrison nodded his thanks, hefting his saddlebags over one massive shoulder. He had no interest in entertainment, but a drink sounded reasonable, and he could ask about a room at the hotel afterward. The saloon's doors swung open easily under his palm, and he stepped into a world of tobacco smoke, cheap perfume, and the tinny sound of a piano being played by someone with more enthusiasm than skill. The music stopped. Conversations faltered and died. Every eye in the room turned toward him, and Harrison felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came from too much attention. He moved toward the bar, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and the crowd parted without him having to ask. The bartender, a thin man with slicked back hair and a nervous smile, hurried over. "What will it be, friend?" "Whiskey. The real stuff, not the watered-down horse piss you serve most folks." The bartender's smile became slightly more genuine. "A man who knows his liquor. Coming right up." Harrison turned, leaning his back against the bar so he could survey the room. Card games resumed at 3 tables. The piano player launched into a jaunty tune that did not match the tension still humming through the air. And then Harrison saw her. She stood on the small stage at the far end of the room, adjusting the bodice of her dress with fingers that trembled slightly. Even from across the smoke-filled space, Harrison could see the purple bruise darkening her cheekbone and the split in her lower lip. Her red hair was piled atop her head in an elaborate arrangement that threatened to collapse at any moment, and her dress, while clearly expensive once, showed signs of rough handling. But what struck Harrison like a physical blow was not her beauty, though she was beautiful in a fierce, untamed way. It was the defiance in her eyes, the set of her jaw that said she had been knocked down but refused to stay there. The bartender placed a glass at Harrison's elbow. "That is Scarlett. Best singer in 3 territories, though most folks come for the view rather than the voice. She had some trouble earlier with the mayor's son. If you are smart, you will look but not touch. That family runs this town, and they do not take kindly to interference." Harrison picked up his glass, his eyes never leaving the woman on the stage. "I did not ask for a history lesson." "Just trying to save you trouble, friend. Mountain men might be tough, but even you cannot fight the whole town." Before Harrison could respond, Scarlett began to sing. Her voice was rich and clear, carrying easily over the ambient noise of the saloon. She sang of lost love and lonely trails, of dreams that died in the desert sun, and hopes that persisted despite all reason. Harrison found himself transfixed, the whiskey forgotten in his hand. He had heard plenty of saloon girls sing in his 30 years of living, but this was different. This woman was not performing for tips or attention. She was singing because something inside her needed to escape, and music was the only door she had found. When the song ended, the applause was enthusiastic if brief. Men returned to their cards and their drinks, and Scarlett descended from the stage, moving between tables with a fixed smile that did not reach her eyes. She took drink orders, laughed at jokes that clearly were not funny, and accepted the occasional familiar touch with a grace that spoke of long practice at hiding her true feelings. Harrison watched a heavy-set man in an expensive suit grab her wrist as she passed. The man's face was flushed with drink, and his voice carried clearly across the room. "Come sit with me, darling. I will make it worth your while." "I need to get these drink orders to the bar, sir. Perhaps later." The man's grip tightened, yanking her closer. "I said now. A saloon girl does not tell a paying customer to wait." Something in Harrison's chest went tight and hot. He set down his glass with deliberate care and started across the room. He moved with surprising grace for a man his size, and before the drunk had time to do more than blink in confusion, Harrison's hand closed over his wrist. "The lady said she has work to do." Harrison's voice was quiet, almost gentle, but there was iron beneath the words. The drunk looked up and up and up, his booze-addled brain slowly processing the sheer size of the man looming over him. His face went pale, and he released Scarlett's wrist as though it had burned him. "No offense meant. Just having some fun." "Find your fun elsewhere." The drunk scrambled from his chair and retreated to the far corner of the saloon, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. The room had gone silent again, and Harrison suddenly remembered why he avoided towns. He turned to find Scarlett staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. "I did not need rescuing," she said, her voice low and tight. "Did not say you did. But a man should not put his hands on a woman who does not want them there. That is rich coming from someone in a saloon. Do you know what men think saloon girls are for?" Harrison met her gaze steadily. "I know what some men think. I also know they are wrong." The words hung between them, and something shifted in Scarlett's expression. The defiance remained, but it was joined by confusion and a tentative curiosity. Before she could respond, A young man in a deputy's badge pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "We do not want trouble here, mountain man. Best you finish your drink and move along." Harrison looked at the deputy with the mild patience of a man who had faced down grizzly bears and was not particularly impressed by human threats. "I am drinking peacefully. If there is trouble, it is not of my making." "You put hands on Mayor Craddock's business partner. That is trouble enough." "I stopped a man from hurting a woman. If that is illegal in this town, your laws need reconsidering." The deputy's face reddened, but before the situation could escalate, Scarlett stepped between them. She placed a hand on Harrison's chest, and even through his shirt he could feel the warmth of her palm. "Please," she said quietly, "just let it go. He's not worth the trouble, and I'm certainly not worth you getting shot." Harrison looked down at her, at the bruise on her face and the weary resignation in her eyes, and felt something crack open inside him. He had spent years alone in the mountains, had convinced himself he preferred solitude, that he was not built for the complications of caring about another person. But standing in that smoke-filled saloon with this fierce, damaged woman's hand on his chest, he realized he had been lying to himself. "You are worth considerably more than you seem to think," he said, and then he turned and walked out into the desert night, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence and a woman whose world had just tilted on its axis. Scarlett stood frozen for a long moment, her hand still raised as though Harrison's chest might materialize beneath her palm once more. The saloon erupted in whispered conversations, and she felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. She lowered her hand slowly, pressing it against her stomach where something fluttered like a caged bird. "Well," Martha said, appearing at her elbow. "That was certainly interesting." "He is a fool," Scarlett said, but the words lacked conviction. "He will get himself killed, interfering in things that are not his concern. Or perhaps he is the first decent man to walk through those doors in years." Scarlett shook her head, forcing her feet to move, to carry her back to the bar where drinks waited to be delivered. "You heard what the deputy said. That man I stopped from grabbing me was Mayor Craddock's partner, which means by tomorrow everyone will know what happened, and that mountain man will have a target on his back. Then perhaps someone should warn him. Why would I care what happens to him? He is a stranger who will be gone in a day or two, back to whatever hole in the mountains he crawled out of." But even as she said it, Scarlett knew it was not true. She did care, and that terrified her more than any threat from the mayor's son or his father's business associates. She had learned long ago not to trust the kindness of men, had built walls around her heart high enough to keep out even the most persistent suitors. Yet with a handful of quiet words, Harrison Thorne had found a crack in those walls, and she did not know how to patch it. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of forced smiles and automatic movements. She sang 2 more songs, served countless drinks, and deflected advances with the practiced ease of years spent in survival mode. When the clock finally struck midnight and the last patron stumbled out into the darkness, Scarlett sat down at an empty table and let her head fall into her hands. "Go on home," the bartender said, not unkindly. "You have had a rough day." "I live upstairs, remember? Home is 3 flights of stairs and a room the size of a coffin. Still, get some rest. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." Scarlett climbed the narrow stairs to the cramped room she shared with Martha, every step an effort. Her body ached from hours spent on her feet, and her face throbbed where she had been struck. But it was the confusion in her mind that exhausted her most. She kept seeing Harrison's face, the quiet certainty in his eyes when he said she was worth more than she thought. Men had said many things to her over the years. They had called her beautiful and tempting, had promised her riches and comfort if she would only do what they wanted. But no one had ever suggested she possessed inherent worth, that her value existed independent of what she could offer them. The idea was so foreign, so impossibly radical, that she did not know what to do with it. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to Martha's soft breathing from the other side of the room, and stared at the water-stained ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her under. Harrison took a room at the hotel, a cramped space with a bed that barely accommodated his frame, but it beat sleeping on the ground. He lay awake for hours, his mind replaying the encounter at the saloon. He had not planned to get involved, had told himself a dozen times on the ride into town that he would stay out of other people's business. But then he had seen that bastard grab her wrist, had seen the flash of fear in her eyes before she masked it with professional courtesy, and his body had moved before his brain caught up. Now he was in a town where he had made enemies before he had been there 3 hours. And for what? A woman who clearly did not want his help, who had looked at him with suspicion rather than gratitude. He should leave at first light, should collect his supplies, and disappear back into the mountains where things made sense and complications did not exist. But he knew he would not. That single touch, her hand on his chest and the look in her eyes when he told her she was worth the trouble, had changed something fundamental. Harrison had always been a solitary man, content with his own company and the simple challenges of survival. Romance was something that happened to other people, men who were smooth-talking and handsome, who knew what to say and how to act in polite society. He was none of those things. He was rough and scarred, more comfortable with animals than people, and his idea of conversation was usually limited to necessary practical exchanges. But when he looked at Scarlett Rose, he had felt a pull so strong it frightened him, a sense that he had been walking through life half asleep and had suddenly been jolted awake. Sleep came eventually, restless and filled with dreams of green eyes and defiant voices, singing songs of heartbreak in smoke-filled rooms. Morning arrived with the harsh brilliance of desert sunshine streaming through thin curtains. Harrison rose, washed in the basin provided, and dressed in clothes that, while clean, had seen better days. He needed to visit the general store, stock up on supplies, and then make a decision about whether to stay or go. Common sense said, go. Every other part of him said, stay. The general store was already open when he arrived, a cluttered space that smelled of coffee and leather and new cloth. The proprietor, a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger and offered a professional smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Help you find something?" Harrison handed over a list he'd compiled in his head during the night. The proprietor read it, nodding occasionally, and began pulling items from shelves. As he worked, other customers entered. 2 women in respectable dresses moved through the aisles, speaking in hushed tones that nevertheless carried clearly in the quiet space. "Absolutely scandalous," one said. "A mountain man brawling in a saloon over one of those women. My husband says he was enormous, practically a savage, and the way he looked at that Scarlett girl, well, it's no wonder she works where she does, probably encouraging him. No decent man wants a saloon girl. Everyone knows that. Those women make their choices, and they must live with the consequences." Harrison's hands clenched into fists where they rested on the counter. The proprietor, noticing the tension, worked faster, piling supplies onto the wooden surface. Harrison paid without comment, gathering his purchases into the canvas sack he had brought for that purpose. As he turned to leave, one of the women looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes widened in recognition, and she clutched her companion's arm, taking an exaggerated step backward as though he might suddenly attack. The gesture, so theatrical and insulting, snapped the last thread of Harrison's patience. "You are right about one thing," he said, his voice carrying easily through the store. "No decent man wants a saloon girl. But I have met plenty of so-called decent folks in my time, and most of them had hearts meaner than any rattlesnake I have encountered in the wild. Give me an honest woman who works for her living over a respectable hypocrite any day." He pushed through the door, leaving shocked silence in his wake. His anger carried him halfway down the street before he realized he was walking toward the saloon rather than the livery. Some part of him, the part that operated on instinct rather than logic, needed to see her again, to know that she was all right after yesterday's confrontation. The Dusty Rose looked different in daylight, smaller and shabbier without the glamour of lamplight and evening shadows. The doors were unlocked, but the interior was empty save for a woman sweeping the floor. She looked up at his entrance, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "We are not open yet. Come back after noon." "I'm looking for Scarlett Rose. Is she here?" The woman's grip on her broom tightened. "Why do you want to know?" "I just want to talk to her. I'm not here to cause trouble." "You are that mountain man from last night, the one who made the deputy angry." "I am Harrison Thorne, and yes, I was here last night. Please, if she is here, just tell her I would like to speak with her." The woman studied him for a long moment, then seemed to reach some internal decision. "Wait here. I will see if she's awake." She disappeared up the stairs at the back of the room, and Harrison waited, feeling awkward and out of place in the empty saloon. Sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated dust motes and revealed stains on the floor that had been invisible in the dim lamplight. He heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to find Scarlett descending, wrapped in a simple dressing gown, with her hair loose around her shoulders. Without the stage makeup and elaborate costume, she looked younger and more vulnerable. The bruise on her face had darkened overnight, a purple shadow that made Harrison's jaw tighten with renewed anger at the man who had put it there. "Martha said you wanted to talk to me." Her voice was cautious, her arms wrapped around herself as though she needed the protection. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. After last night, I thought there might be trouble." "There is always trouble. Last night was nothing new. The man who hit you, the mayor's son. Will he come back?" Scarlett laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Probably. Men like that always do. They think we owe them something, that working in a saloon means we have no right to refuse anything they demand." Harrison took a step closer, then stopped when he saw her tense. "What if you did not work here anymore? What if you left?" "And go where? Do what? This is the only life available to women like me. I have no family, no husband, no prospects. At least here I can sing and earn enough to eat and have a roof over my head. It is not much, but it is survival." "You deserve more than survival." "Perhaps, but deserving and getting are two very different things." They stood in silence for a moment, the morning light harsh and revealing. Harrison wanted to say so many things, wanted to promise her protection and safety and a life where she would not have to smile at men who hurt her. But he was just a mountain man with no home beyond what he could carry on his back, and she was a woman who had clearly learned not to trust promises. "I'm staying in town for a few days," he said finally. "If you need anything, anything at all, you can find me at the hotel." "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I'm nothing to you." Harrison met her eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was absolutely certain. "You could never be nothing, Scarlett Rose." He left before she could respond, before his courage failed, and he said something foolish that would drive her away completely. Behind him, Scarlett stood frozen in the empty saloon, her hand pressed over her racing heart, and wondered what kind of man rode out of the mountains and turned her entire world upside down. The next 2 days passed in a strange dance of advance and retreat. Harrison found excuses to return to the saloon each evening, always choosing a table in the back where he could watch Scarlett sing without drawing too much attention. He never approached her, never asked her to sit with him or tried to claim her time the way other customers did. He simply sat with his whiskey and listened, and somehow his presence became a comfort rather than a threat. Scarlett found herself looking for him as she moved through the crowd, found her eyes seeking out his massive frame in the back corner. He never leered or made crude comments. He simply watched her with an expression she could not quite decipher, something intense and focused that should have made her uncomfortable, but instead made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. On the third night, she made a decision that surprised even herself. After her last song, instead of working the room as expected, she walked directly to Harrison's table and sat down without being invited. "You're going to get me in trouble," she said, but her tone was more amused than angry. "The boss does not like it when we spend time with customers who do not spend money." Harrison signaled the bartender, held up 2 fingers. "Whiskey for the lady, put it on my tab." Scarlett shook her head. "You do not have to do that." "I know, I want to." The drinks arrived, and Scarlett took a long sip, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "Why are you still here? I thought mountain men could not stand towns for more than a day or 2. "Usually true, but I found a reason to stay a little longer." "That reason would not happen to be a saloon girl with a smart mouth and a talent for getting in trouble, would it?" "It would." The directness of his answer caught her off guard. Scarlett was used to men who hid their intentions behind flattery and false promises. Harrison's honesty was jarring and refreshing in equal measure. "You should not waste your time on me," she said softly. "I am not looking for a protector or a savior. I have survived this long on my own, and I will continue to do so. Did not offer to save you, just offering to be here while you save yourself." Scarlett looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. In the lamplight, his face was all hard angles and weathered skin, a face that had seen harsh winters and difficult choices. But his eyes were kind, a deep brown that held warmth despite the rough exterior. And when he looked at her, she did not see judgment or calculation. She saw respect. "Tell me something," she said, leaning forward slightly. "What is it like up there in the mountains? Is it really as beautiful as they say?" Harrison's face softened, and for the next hour he talked. He described the high valleys where snow stayed year-round, the crystal-clear streams that ran cold enough to make your teeth ache, the silence that was so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. He told her about tracking elk through pine forests, about watching the sun rise over peaks that seemed to touch the sky, about nights spent under stars so bright they looked like holes punched in black velvet. Scarlett listened, mesmerized. She had never been more than 20 miles from Old Tucson, had never seen mountains or snow or forests. Her entire world consisted of this dusty town and the cramped room upstairs, and listening to Harrison describe a life so different from her own was like hearing a fairy tale. "It sounds lonely," she said when he paused. "It is, but loneliness in beautiful places is better than loneliness in ugly ones." "I would not know. I've only ever been lonely here." The confession slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately wished she could take it back. But Harrison did not look at her with pity or smugness. He simply nodded as though he understood perfectly. Loneliness is loneliness, no matter where you find it, but it does not have to be permanent. Before Scarlett could respond, a commotion at the front of the saloon drew their attention. A group of men pushed through the doors, and at their center was a young man in expensive clothes with a face flushed from drink. Even from across the room, Scarlett recognized him and felt ice flood her veins. "That is him," she whispered, "the mayor's son, Thomas Craddock." Harrison's expression went completely still, a predator recognizing a threat. "The one who hit you?" "Yes." "And he looks angry?" Thomas Craddock's eyes swept the room and landed on Scarlett sitting with Harrison. His face twisted with rage, and he started across the floor, his companions trailing behind like pilot fish following a shark. "Well, well," Thomas said, his words slightly slurred. "The high and mighty saloon girl has found herself a pet bear. Tell me, Scarlett, does he do tricks? Can he dance for us?" Harrison stood slowly, unfolding to his full height. Thomas had to crane his neck back to meet his eyes, and some of the drunken bravado faded from his expression. "You should leave," Harrison said quietly. "I should leave? This is my town, mountain man. My father owns half the buildings on this street, including this saloon, which means I can do whatever I want, with whomever I want." His hand shot out, reaching for Scarlett's arm. Harrison moved faster than a man his size should have been able to move, catching Thomas's wrist in an iron grip. "The lady does not want your touch. I will not tell you again." For a moment, the entire saloon held its breath. Thomas tried to yank his arm free and could not, his face reddening with effort and humiliation. His companions shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons they wore at their hips. "Let him go!" the bartender called from behind the counter, his voice tight with fear. "Please, we do not want trouble." Harrison released Thomas's wrist with a slight push that sent the younger man stumbling backward. "There will not be any trouble as long as people keep their hands to themselves." Thomas rubbed his wrist, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, mountain man. Nobody touches me and lives to tell about it. My father will have you run out of town or killed, whichever is more convenient. Then I guess I will see your father when he is ready. Until then, leave the lady alone." Thomas opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. He spun on his heel and stalked out of the saloon, his friends hurrying after him. The moment the doors swung shut behind them, the room erupted in urgent whispers. Scarlett grabbed Harrison's arm, her fingers digging into his bicep. "You need to leave Old Tucson tonight, right now. When Thomas tells his father what happened, they will come for you, and Mayor Craddock is not a forgiving man. I am not running from bullies. This is not about being brave. This is about staying alive. The mayor has men, armed men who do whatever he tells them. You might be strong, but you cannot fight 20 men with guns." Harrison looked down at her, at the fear in her eyes, and realized with startling clarity that she was not just afraid for him. She was afraid of what would happen to her after he was gone. "Come with me," he said. Scarlett froze. "What?" "Come with me. Leave this place. I have a cabin in the mountains, nothing fancy, but it is clean and safe, and no one would bother you there." "You are insane. You want me to run off into the wilderness with a man I have known for 3 days? I'm offering you a choice, Scarlett. Stay here and keep surviving. Keep smiling at men who hurt you and singing in a saloon that does not deserve you, or take a chance on something different. I do not even know you. You know I do not lie to you. You know I respect you. You know I would die before I let anyone hurt you again. What else do you need to know?" Scarlett pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. Her mind was racing, fear and hope and desire tangling together until she could not separate one from the other. Running away with a mountain man was madness. It was the kind of reckless decision that got women killed, or worse. But staying meant more nights of dodging Thomas Craddock's advances, more years of watching her youth and beauty fade in the mirror while men treated her like property. "I need time to think," she whispered. "You have until morning. That is when I leave, with or without you. I will be at the livery at first light." He left then, walking out into the night without looking back, and Scarlett stood in the middle of the saloon feeling like she had just been offered wings but had no idea how to fly. She did not sleep that night. Martha found her sitting by the window, staring out at the dark street, and sat down beside her without speaking. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep across the sky, Martha broke the silence. "You are going with him." It was not a question. Scarlett turned to look at her friend, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know what to do. If I stay, I know what my life will be. More of the same, year after year until I am too old and worn out to even work in a saloon. But if I go, I could be making the worst mistake of my life. Or you could be making the best decision you ever made. Scarlett, in all the years I have known you, I have never seen you look at a man the way you look at Harrison Thorne. That mountain man sees you, really sees you, not just the dress and the smile, but the woman underneath. Men like that do not come along every day. He could change once we are alone. He could turn out to be just like all the others. He could. Or he could be exactly what he appears to be, an honest man who wants to give you a better life. You will never know unless you take the risk." Scarlett closed her eyes, letting the tears fall unchecked. "I am terrified. I know. But you are also one of the bravest women I have ever met. You have survived things that would have broken most people. You can survive this too, whatever it brings." As the sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, Scarlett Rose made her decision. She packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, changed into her simplest dress, and walked down the stairs for the last time. The saloon owner tried to stop her, threatened to withhold her pay, but Martha intervened, her voice sharp and unyielding until the man grudgingly counted out the coins Scarlett was owed. The walk to the livery felt like it took both an eternity and no time at all. With each step, Scarlett expected to turn back, to lose her nerve and retreat to the familiar misery of her old life. But her feet kept moving, carrying her forward toward an uncertain future, and a man who had promised her nothing except respect and honesty. Harrison was in the stable, saddling his horse when she arrived. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps, and his entire face transformed. The guarded expression he usually wore melted away, replaced by something so openly joyful it made Scarlett's breath catch. "You came. I must be insane." "Probably, but we will be insane together." He helped her onto the horse, his hands gentle on her waist, and then swung up behind her. Scarlett had never ridden a horse before, had never even left old Tucson, and as the town began to recede behind them, she felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror that made her dizzy. "Where are we going?" she asked as the desert stretched out before them, vast and golden in the morning light. "Home," Harrison said simply, and wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her. "We are going home." They rode for 3 days, stopping only to rest the horse and sleep under the stars. Harrison had brought supplies, and each night he built a fire and cooked simple meals that tasted better than anything Scarlett had ever eaten in the saloon. He told her about the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, about the life she could expect if she chose to stay with him. "I will not lie to you," he said on the second night as they sat close to the fire for warmth. "It is a hard life. The winters are brutal, and we will be alone for months at a time. No shops, no neighbors, no easy comforts. You will have to learn to hunt and fish and preserve food. You will have to get comfortable with silence and your own company." "Tell me the good parts," Scarlett said, pulling the blanket Harrison had given her tighter around her shoulders. "The good parts are that you will be free. No one to tell you what to wear or how to smile or who you have to entertain. You can sing whenever you want, but only if it makes you happy. You can wake up every morning and step outside into air so clean it makes your lungs hurt. You can watch elk grazing in meadows and eagles hunting from the sky. You can be exactly who you are, without apology or shame." "And you?" Scarlett asked softly. "What do you get out of this arrangement?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "I get to stop being lonely. I get to share my life with someone who makes me want to be a better man. I get to fall asleep knowing you are safe and wake up seeing your face. That seems like more than I have any right to ask for." Scarlett felt something shift in her chest, like a lock tumbling open after years of rust and disuse. She reached out and took Harrison's hand, threading her fingers through his much larger ones. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "Good. Only fools are not scared of change, but sometimes the scariest choices lead to the best outcomes." That night, wrapped in blankets with Harrison's solid presence beside her and the stars blazing overhead, Scarlett felt something she had not experienced in years. She felt hope. The mountains appeared on the fourth day, rising from the desert floor like the backbone of some ancient giant. Scarlett had never seen anything so massive, so overwhelming in their scale. Snow capped the highest peaks even though it was still autumn, and pine forests cloaked their flanks in deep green. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Wait until you see it up close." They began the climb as the sun reached its zenith, following a narrow trail that wound between boulders and through stands of aspen trees that shimmered gold in the breeze. The air grew cooler and thinner, and Scarlett found herself gulping breaths as they gained elevation. But Harrison was patient, stopping frequently to let her rest and pointing out landmarks and wildlife. He showed her where bears marked territory on tree trunks, how to identify fresh mountain lion tracks, which plants were safe to eat and which would make you sick. Every piece of information was delivered without condescension, as though he genuinely believed she could learn these skills and wanted to ensure she could survive if something happened to him. As the sun began its descent, they crested a ridge and Harrison pointed ahead. "There, that's home." The cabin sat in a small meadow surrounded by pine forest, with a stream running nearby. It was larger than Scarlett had expected, built from solid logs chinked with mud and moss. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and there was a small barn attached to one side for the horse. "You left a fire burning when you left?" "I have a neighbor, old Pete, who checks on the place when I'm gone. He must have known I was coming back soon." They rode into the clearing, and a grizzled man with a wild beard emerged from the cabin, waving enthusiastically. "Harrison, about time you showed up. Been keeping your fire going for 2 days now." He stopped short when he saw Scarlett. "Well now, who is this?" Harrison helped Scarlett dismount, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow as she found her balance. "Pete, this is Scarlett Rose. Scarlett, this is Pete Morgan, my closest neighbor and the only man I trust not to steal my traps." "Pleased to meet you, miss," Pete said, his eyes crinkling with curiosity and amusement. Did not know Harrison was courting anyone. He's usually too stubborn and antisocial for that sort of thing. "We are still figuring out what we are," Scarlett said, finding her voice. "But he offered me a new life, and I was foolish or brave enough to accept." Pete laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountainside. "I like her. She has spirit. You will need it to put up with this one." He clapped Harrison on the shoulder. "I will leave you two to get settled. Welcome to the high country, Miss Scarlett. It will either kill you or make you stronger. Most likely both." He departed on his own horse, and suddenly Scarlett and Harrison were alone in the clearing, the reality of what they had done settling over them like the evening shadows. Harrison cleared his throat, looking almost shy. "Come on, I will show you around." The cabin was simple but well built, consisting of a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a separate sleeping space partitioned off with a curtain. Furs covered the floor and hung on the walls for insulation, and the furniture was handmade but sturdy. There were shelves lined with books which surprised Scarlett, and a rocking chair near the fireplace that looked worn from use. "You read?" she asked, running her fingers along the spines. "Bueno, pa." "When the nights are long and there is nothing else to do. I am not educated, but I taught myself from books I traded for in town. Figured if I was going to be alone with my thoughts, I might as well make those thoughts interesting." Scarlett pulled out a volume, recognizing it as poetry. I did not expect a mountain man to read poetry. People are more complicated than the boxes we put them in. You are learning that about me. I am learning that about you. She set the book down and turned to face him. "What happens now, Harrison? We are here, alone in this cabin, and we barely know each other. What are the expectations?" Harrison met her gaze steadily. "The only expectation is honesty. You sleep in the bedroom. I will take the main room until you decide otherwise. You are free to leave whenever you want, though I hope you will give this life a real chance first. And you are safe here, Scarlett. I meant what I said in town. I would die before I let anyone hurt you, but that includes me. I will never force you to do anything you do not want to do." The simple sincerity of his words brought tears to Scarlett's eyes. She had spent so many years being treated like property, like something to be used and discarded, that she had almost forgotten it was possible for a man to respect her boundaries. "Thank you," she whispered. That night they ate a simple dinner of stew that Pete had left warming by the fire. They talked about small things, learning the contours of each other's lives through careful questions and honest answers. Scarlett learned that Harrison's parents had died when he was young, that he had spent time working in lumber camps before deciding he preferred solitude to the company of rough men. Harrison learned that Scarlett had been orphaned at 15, that she had worked as a seamstress's assistant before the woman died and left her with no options except the saloon. When exhaustion finally claimed them both, Harrison showed Scarlett to the bedroom, a small space dominated by a bed covered in thick quilts and furs. He lingered in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "If you need anything in the night, just call out. I will hear you." "Harrison," Scarlett said as he turned to leave. "Yes?" "Thank you for this, for all of it. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I am grateful." His smile was gentle and warm. "Get some rest, Scarlett Rose. Tomorrow I will start teaching you how to survive in these mountains." The door closed softly, and Scarlett was alone in the darkness. She lay down on the bed, sinking into softness she had never experienced in her cramped room above the saloon, and let the events of the past week wash over her. She had run away from the only life she had ever known, had trusted a man she barely knew to bring her to the middle of nowhere, and somehow it felt like the first sensible decision she had made in years. Outside, she could hear the wind moving through the pine trees, a sound so different from the drunken shouts and piano music of old Tucson that it seemed like she had traveled to another world entirely. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, fell asleep without fear. The next weeks passed in a blur of learning and adaptation. Harrison was a patient teacher, showing Scarlett how to chop wood without hitting her foot, how to start a fire even when the wood was damp, how to read animal tracks and predict weather by observing the sky. She learned to cook over an open flame, to preserve meat by smoking it, to identify which plants could be used for medicine. It was exhausting work, and there were days when Scarlett wanted to weep from frustration and homesickness for the familiar, no matter how miserable that familiar had been. But Harrison never mocked her failures or lost patience with her questions. He simply showed her again, adjusted her grip or her stance, and celebrated every small victory like it was a major triumph. And slowly, Scarlett began to change. Her hands, once soft despite years of saloon work, developed calluses. Her body, always slender, grew stronger from the constant physical labor. She found she could hike for hours without gasping for breath, could carry buckets of water from the stream without stopping to rest. But the changes went deeper than the physical. Away from the constant judgment and degradation of town life, Scarlett began to remember who she had been before circumstance hardened her. She laughed more easily, sang for the pure joy of it rather than for tips and applause. She asked questions without fear of appearing ignorant, and expressed opinions without worrying about offending male egos. And Harrison watched her transformation, with a mixture of pride and something deeper, something that made his chest ache when she smiled at him across the dinner table, or when he woke to find her already up, singing softly as she prepared coffee. He was falling in love with her, had perhaps been falling since the moment he saw her standing on that stage with defiance blazing in her eyes. But he held his feelings close, afraid that speaking them aloud would shatter the fragile peace they had built. She had trusted him enough to come here, had taken an enormous leap of faith. The last thing he wanted was to make her feel obligated or pressured. The first snow came in late October, dusting the meadow with white powder that sparkled in the morning sun. Scarlett stood at the window, watching the flakes fall, and felt Harrison come up behind her. "It is beautiful," she said. "This is nothing. Wait until we get a real storm. Snow will come up past the windows, and we will be trapped inside for days." "That sounds terrible." "It can be, but it can also be cozy if you have good company and enough supplies." Scarlett turned to look at him, suddenly aware of how close he was standing, how she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Harrison, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why me? You could have any woman you wanted, someone educated and refined, someone who knows how to run a household and would not need to be taught how to do everything from scratch. Why did you choose a broken-down saloon girl with no skills and a reputation?" Harrison's expression went very serious. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one large hand, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "You are not broken, Scarlett. You are bent, maybe, shaped by hard circumstances, but not broken. And I did not choose you for what you could do or what skills you had. I chose you because when I looked at you, I saw someone real, someone who had survived hell and came out still fighting, still hoping, someone who was brave enough to take a chance on a better life even when it terrified her. That is worth more than all the education and refinement in the world." Scarlett felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I do not know how to be what you need. You already are, just by being here, by trying, by not giving up even when it is hard. That is all I need." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as she let herself accept the comfort he was offering. "I was so sure I would never trust a man again. They had proven too many times that they only wanted one thing, and once they got it, I was nothing to them. Then they were fools, and I will spend however long it takes proving that not all men are like that." Scarlett opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written plainly in his expression. He loved her. This massive, gentle mountain man who could survive alone in the wilderness, who could face down armed men without flinching, loved her with an honesty that was almost painful to witness. "Harrison," she whispered, "I think I am falling in love with you, and it terrifies me." His smile was brilliant, transforming his rough features into something approaching beautiful. "I am already in love with you, and it terrifies me too. So I guess we will just have to be terrified together." And then he kissed her, gentle and careful, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Scarlett did not pull away. She leaned in, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and hope she had been carrying since the day they met. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said. No pressure, no expectations. We move at whatever pace you need." "What if I do not want to move slowly anymore?" Scarlett asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I am tired of being afraid and I just want to be happy? Then I will do everything in my power to make you happy, for as long as you let me." That night, when Scarlett went to the bedroom, she left the door open. It was invitation and question in one gesture. Harrison stood in the main room for a long moment, making absolutely certain he understood what she was offering. Then he banked the fire, checked the door, and followed her into the small space that had been hers alone. "Are you sure?" he asked, standing at the foot of the bed. "I am sure. I want this, Harrison. I want you." He came to her then, and they learned each other in the darkness, every touch a revelation, every whispered word a promise. Harrison was gentle and patient, asking permission with every escalation, making sure she felt safe and wanted. And Scarlett, who had spent years believing her body was all she had to offer, discovered that intimacy could be about more than transaction, that it could be about connection and trust and genuine affection. Afterward, wrapped in Harrison's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Scarlett felt something settle inside her. She had spent so long running and surviving that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be at peace. But here, in this cabin in the mountains with snow falling softly outside, she finally understood what home could mean. "I love you," she said into the darkness. Harrison's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, Scarlett Rose, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me." Winter came in earnest the following week, with storms that buried the cabin under several feet of snow and howling winds that rattled the shutters. They were trapped inside for days at a time, but instead of feeling claustrophobic, Scarlett found she cherished the enforced intimacy. They read to each other from Harrison's books, played cards for matchsticks, and made love with the slow thoroughness of people who had nowhere else to be. Harrison taught her how to tan hides and sew them into clothing, how to make soap from animal fat and lye, how to brew medicines from dried herbs. Scarlett taught him the songs she had learned in the saloon, though she changed the bawdy lyrics to make them her own. She told him about her dreams of becoming a real singer, performing in theaters rather than saloons, and he listened with the focused attention that made her feel like her dreams mattered. As winter deepened, they developed routines that felt as comfortable as well-worn clothes. Harrison would wake first, rebuild the fire, and start coffee while Scarlett slowly emerged from sleep. They would eat breakfast together, plan the day's chores, and then work side by side to complete them. Evenings were for quiet conversation and stolen kisses, for reading by firelight and making plans for the spring. "When the snow melts, I want to show you the high meadows," Harrison said one night as they lay tangled together under a mountain of quilts. "There are flowers up there in spring that you would not believe. Colors so bright they hurt your eyes, and the smell is like nothing you have ever experienced." "I want to see everything," Scarlett said. "Every part of your world, every place that made you who you are. Our world now, and we have a lifetime to explore it." The word lifetime hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Harrison cleared his throat, and Scarlett could feel tension enter his body. "What is it?" she asked, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I have been thinking about something. About us. About what comes next." "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important." He sat up, running a hand through his hair, suddenly looking nervous in a way Scarlett had never seen. "I know we have not been together long. I know you might want more time before we make things official. But Scarlett, I do not want you to have any doubt about my intentions. I want to marry you, if you will have me. I want to stand before Pete and whoever else we can find and make promises that the whole world can hear. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours. And that is never going to change." Scarlett felt her breath catch in her throat. Marriage. She had dreamed of it as a young girl, before life had taught her that dreams were dangerous indulgences. And here was this beautiful, impossible man offering her not just love, but commitment, not just companionship, but a future. "Yes," she said, the word coming out somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, I will marry you, Harrison Thorne. I will marry you and spend the rest of my life in these mountains with you, and I will never regret a single moment of it." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt dampness on her hair that might have been tears. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, while outside the wind howled and the snow continued to fall. When spring finally arrived, the transformation was almost miraculous. The snow melted in rushing streams that fed the creek until it roared past the cabin. Green shoots pushed up through the mud, and within weeks the meadow was carpeted with wildflowers exactly as Harrison had promised. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the air with song, and the forest came alive with deer and elk emerging from their winter hiding places. Harrison and Scarlett stood on the cabin's porch one morning in late April, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of rose and gold, and made their plans. "Pete can perform the ceremony," Harrison said. "He is a notary and has the authority to make it legal. We can ride over to his place, have a simple service, and be back before dark. Nothing fancy, just us in the mountains and our promises." "Sounds perfect." They married on the first day of May, standing in the clearing outside Pete's cabin with wildflowers woven into Scarlett's hair. She wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from cloth Harrison had traded for before winter, and Harrison wore his cleanest shirt and trousers with his hair tied back neatly. Pete spoke words about commitment and partnership, about facing life's challenges together, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Scarlett with such tender joy that even the grizzled old mountain man had to wipe at his eyes. They celebrated with a meal Pete had prepared, venison steaks and wild greens and bread that was only slightly burned, and when they rode back to their cabin as the sun began to set, Scarlett felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "Mrs. Thorne," Harrison said as they dismounted, "how does that sound?" "Like coming home," Scarlett replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Summer brought long days of work and exploration. Harrison took Scarlett higher into the mountains, showing her hidden valleys and crystal-clear lakes fed by snowmelt. They fished for trout in streams so cold their hands went numb and roasted their catch over fires built from deadfall pine. They made love under the stars on beds of soft moss and talked about everything and nothing while the universe wheeled overhead. Scarlett's skill with a rifle improved until she could bring down a deer cleanly, and though she cried the first time she had to field dress her kill, Harrison held her and explained that honoring the animal by using every part was the right way to live off the land. She learned to make jerky and pemmican, to smoke fish and preserve berries, preparing for the next winter that would inevitably come. But it was not all work. They found time for joy in small moments, dancing in the meadow to music only they could hear, swimming in a secluded pond when the water was warm enough, reading aloud from books while thunder rolled across the peaks. Every day brought something new to love about this life they were building together. In late August, Scarlett woke feeling nauseous and had to rush outside before she embarrassed herself. It happened again the next morning and the morning after that. She knew what it meant even before she missed her monthly courses, and the knowledge filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. She told Harrison one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction, "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Harrison just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every animal within a mile. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Scarlett, do you know what this means? That I am going to be huge and uncomfortable and cranky for months? That we are going to be a family. A real family." He set her down gently, suddenly terrified he might have hurt her, and placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mother and I are already crazy about you, and we cannot wait to meet you." Scarlett covered his hand with hers, tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared, Harrison. What if I do not know how to be a mother? What if something goes wrong? Then we will figure it out together, same as everything else, and nothing is going to go wrong. You are strong, Scarlett. Stronger than anyone I have ever known. You will be an amazing mother." As fall approached and Scarlett's belly began to swell with their child, they prepared for the birth with typical mountain pragmatism. Pete, who had helped deliver more than a few babies in his years in the wilderness, agreed to be present when the time came. They gathered clean cloths and boiled water, stockpiled firewood, and Harrison read every book on childbirth he could trade for when he made a supply run to the nearest trading post. Winter came early that year, and Scarlett grew large and uncomfortable as the snow piled high around the cabin. She waddled more than walked, and her back ached constantly. But Harrison was endlessly patient, rubbing her feet in the evenings and building up the fire when she complained of being cold. He talked to their unborn child constantly, telling stories about the mountains and making promises about all the adventures they would have together. The baby came on a bitterly cold night in February, with wind screaming around the cabin and snow falling so thickly they could not see more than a few feet. Pete had arrived 2 days earlier, sensing the birth was imminent, and he helped Harrison through the terrifying hours of labor with calm competence born of experience. Scarlett had thought she knew what pain was, had survived beatings and hunger and the slow erosion of hope. But childbirth was a different kind of suffering, all-consuming and relentless. She screamed and cursed and gripped Harrison's hand so tightly she thought she might break his fingers. But he never let go, never stopped murmuring encouragement and love, even when she told him this was all his fault. And then, as the night reached its darkest hour before dawn, a baby's cry split the air. Pete held up a squirming, red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. "It is a boy," Pete announced, grinning through his beard. "A big, healthy boy." Harrison cut the cord with shaking hands, and Pete cleaned the baby before placing him in Scarlett's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, at the eyes that struggled to focus on her own, and felt her heart expand until it threatened to crack her ribs. "Hello, Henry," she whispered, using the name they had chosen weeks ago. "Hello, my beautiful boy. We are so happy you are finally here." Harrison knelt beside the bed, his arm around Scarlett, staring at their son with naked wonder. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe we made him." "Believe it," Pete said, gathering his supplies. "And get used to not sleeping for the next few months. That boy has a good set of lungs on him." Pete was right. Henry was a demanding baby who seemed to exist in only two states, sleeping or screaming. But Scarlett and Harrison were too besotted to care. They took turns walking him when he fussed, sang him songs in the middle of the night, and spent hours just watching him sleep because his tiny perfection never stopped being miraculous. As winter slowly released its grip and spring returned to the mountains, Henry began to change. He smiled for the first time when he was 6 weeks old, a gummy grin that made both his parents weep with joy. He learned to grab at things, to track movement with his eyes, to gurgle and coo in response to their voices. Scarlett would sit in the rocking chair by the fire, nursing Henry while Harrison read aloud, and think about how far she had come. 2 years ago, she had been a saloon girl in old Tucson with no prospects and no hope. She had believed herself unworthy of love, had resigned herself to a life of servitude and shame. But Harrison had seen something different. He had looked past the costume and the reputation and had found the woman underneath. He had offered her respect first, then friendship, and finally a love so deep and unwavering it had transformed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, noticing her distant expression. "About how the women in old Tucson used to say that no decent man wants a saloon girl. How they made sure we knew we were less than human, unworthy of kindness or consideration." Harrison set down his book and came to kneel beside the rocking chair. He took Scarlett's free hand in both of his expression fierce and tender at once. "Then I guess I am not a decent man, because I do not just want you, Scarlett. I need you. You are the air I breathe and the ground I stand on. You made my life make sense when I did not even know it was incomplete. And if being indecent means loving you with everything I have, then I will wear that label with pride." Scarlett leaned down and kissed him, careful not to disturb the baby sleeping at her breast. "Then call yourself Indecent, Harrison Thorne, and I will call myself the luckiest woman alive." The years that followed were not always easy. There were harsh winters that tested their endurance, summers when the stream ran dry and they had to haul water from miles away. There was the year a grizzly bear destroyed their smokehouse and they nearly starved before Harrison could take enough game to replace what was lost. There was the terrifying week when Henry developed a fever and they thought they might lose him, only for his strong constitution to pull him through. But there were also moments of transcendent beauty. The first time Henry took his first steps, lurching across the cabin floor into Scarlett's waiting arms. The birth of their daughter, Sophia, 3 years after Henry, an easy delivery that left Scarlett exhausted but triumphant. The day Harrison taught Henry to fish, and the boy caught his first trout, his face glowing with pride. They built a life from nothing but determination and love, and it was rich in ways that had nothing to do with money or possessions. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning to read from their mother and to survive from their father. Henry had Harrison's size and quiet strength, while Sophia inherited Scarlett's green eyes and stubborn independence. Occasionally, they would make the journey down to the trading post for supplies, and inevitably, they would hear news from old Tucson. The Dusty Rose had burned down 5 years after Scarlett left, taking 3 women with it. Thomas Craddock had been found dead in an alley behind a different saloon, killed in a gambling dispute. His father had lost his fortune through bad investments and had drunk himself to death shortly after. Scarlett felt a distant sadness for the lives lost and wasted, but she also felt gratitude that she had escaped that world. If Harrison had not walked into the Dusty Rose that night, if he had not seen past her costume to the woman beneath, she might have died in that fire or ended up like Thomas, another casualty of a brutal frontier town. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Scarlett back to the high meadow where they had first made love under the stars. They left the children with Pete, who had become a doting grandfather figure, and spent 2 days alone in the wilderness that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Harrison asked as they lay in their bedrolls, watching meteor showers streak across the sky. "Leaving town, marrying me, choosing this hard life?" Scarlett rolled onto her side, studying her husband's profile in the starlight. He was older now, his beard streaked with gray and lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still her Harrison, still the man who had offered her respect when the world had given her none. "Not once," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life, Harrison, a real life, with love and purpose and children who will never know what it is like to be judged for circumstances beyond their control. How could I ever regret that? I just want to make sure you are happy, that I have given you enough. You have given me everything that matters. Those people in old Tucson were right about one thing. No decent man did want a saloon girl. But you were never decent in the way they meant it. You were indecent enough to see past their judgments, indecent enough to offer me a chance when no one else would. And that indecency saved my life." Harrison pulled her close, and they made love slowly under the wheeling stars, celebrating a decade of partnership and survival. When they rode back to the cabin 2 days later, they found their children and Pete making a terrible mess attempting to cook dinner, and the laughter that filled the small space was worth more than any fortune. More years passed and their children grew. Henry became a guide for hunters who wanted to explore the high country, his knowledge of the mountains as extensive as his father's. Sophia married a trapper's son and built her own cabin 5 miles downstream, close enough to visit but far enough for independence. And Scarlett and Harrison settled into the comfortable rhythm of long married couples who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger. On a warm summer evening when Scarlett was 45 and Harrison was 53, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of purple and gold. Henry was visiting with his new wife, a sharp-tongued woman from the trading post who Harrison had instantly liked. Sophia had just announced she was pregnant with their first grandchild, and Scarlett felt a contentment so profound it was almost overwhelming. "We did well," Harrison said, his hand finding hers on the armrest of his rocking chair. "Built something good from almost nothing." "We did," Scarlett agreed, "and I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the parts where I was insufferable and you wanted to brain me with a frying pan. Especially not those parts. They taught me that love is not just romance and passion. It is also patience and forgiveness and choosing each other every single day, even when it would be easier not to." Harrison raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you, Scarlett Thorne. I loved you from the moment I saw you standing on that stage, defiant and beautiful. I loved you when you took a chance on a mountain man who could offer you nothing but hard work and honesty. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond if there is anything after." "And I love you," Scarlett said, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. "You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I was worthless in everyone else's eyes. You gave me a home and a family and a life worth living. How could I not love you with everything I am?" As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and the sounds of their children's laughter drifted from inside the cabin, Scarlett reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had started life as an orphan with no prospects, had survived years as a saloon girl in a town that viewed her as property rather than a person. She had been hit and degraded and told repeatedly that she was not worthy of love or respect. But then a mountain man with shoulders like boulders and a heart bigger than the peaks he called home had walked into her life and changed everything. He had not tried to save her or fix her. He had simply offered her a choice and then respected whatever she decided. And when she chose him, chose this life of struggle and beauty and endless horizons, he had spent every day since proving that her choice was the right one. No decent man wants a saloon girl, they had said. But Harrison Thorne had proven that decency was a matter of character, not respectability. That a man who lived rough and alone in the wilderness could have more honor than any mayor or businessman in a civilized town. That love was not about status or reputation, but about seeing another person's true worth and cherishing it. And so Scarlett had learned to call him indecent, to wear it as a badge of honor rather than shame. Because his indecency had given her freedom, had shown her that there was more to life than survival, that happiness was possible even for women who had fallen as far as she had. Their story was not a fairy tale. There was no castle or riches or rescue by a prince, but it was a love story, perhaps the truest kind, built on respect and trust and two people choosing each other every day despite all the reasons they could have walked away. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, Scarlett knew with absolute certainty that she had found something far more valuable than respectability or acceptance from the town that had rejected her. She had found home. Years continued to flow like the stream past their cabin, each season bringing its own gifts and challenges. Scarlett's hair turned silver, and Harrison's beard went white. Their bodies moved more slowly, joints stiff from decades of hard labor and harsh winters. But their love remained constant, a foundation that never cracked or shifted, no matter what storms came. They became grandparents 4 times over, with Henry having 3 children and Sophia producing a son who had Harrison's size and Scarlett's voice. The cabin rang with children's laughter during visits, and Pete, now ancient but still stubborn, would sit in the rocking chair and tell stories that got taller with each retelling. On a crisp autumn morning when Scarlett was 68, she stood at the same spot where Harrison had first brought her to see the cabin decades ago. The structure had been expanded over the years, with additions to accommodate visiting family, but the core remained the same, solid logs chinked against the mountain cold. Harrison came up behind her, moving with the careful deliberation of age, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Thorne?" "About how far we have come. About how that frightened saloon girl never imagined she would live to be an old woman surrounded by children and grandchildren. About how the bitter, lonely mountain man found a family when he thought he preferred solitude." "We were both wrong about what we needed," Harrison said, his voice roughened by decades of mountain air and weather. "And we were both lucky enough to find each other anyway." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their grandson chase a butterfly through the meadow while Sophia called warnings about getting too close to the stream. This was their legacy, not wealth or power, but love that had multiplied and spread like wildflowers taking root in unlikely places. "Do you think they tell our story?" Scarlett asked suddenly. "Back in old Tucson or in the trading posts or wherever people gather to gossip?" "Probably. Mountain Man steals away a saloon girl. It has all the elements of a good tale. I wonder if they understand that you did not steal me. I gave myself willingly. I chose this life, chose you, and never looked back." Harrison turned her in his arms, looking down at her face with the same intensity he had shown that first night in the saloon. "They do not need to understand. What we built here, what we have, it exists independent of anyone else's opinion. We know the truth, and that is all that matters. The truth that no decent man wants a saloon girl. The truth that I was never decent by their standards, and I am damn proud of it. Being indecent meant I was free to love who I wanted, to build a life that made sense to me rather than them. And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Scarlett reached up and cupped his weathered face in her equally weathered hands. "Then here is to indecency, my love. May it continue to serve us well." They kissed then, 2 old people who had walked through fire together and emerged not just intact but transformed. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky and their family moved around them in the familiar rhythms of life, Scarlett sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For the night a massive mountain man had walked into a saloon and offered her something she had never dared to dream of. A future, a family, a love that lasted. The ending came peacefully. as it should for people who had lived fully and loved deeply. Harrison passed first on a cold February morning in his 81st year. He went to sleep in Scarlett's arms and simply did not wake, his heart finally deciding it had beaten enough times. Scarlett held him for a long time, memorizing the face she had loved for over 40 years, and then she let Henry and Sophia make the arrangements. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the cabin, in a spot where he could see the peaks he had loved and the home he had built. The entire family gathered, along with Pete's grandson, and families from the trading post who had known Harrison as a fair trader and honest man. And Scarlett sang, her voice thin with age, but still carrying the clear notes that had first captivated a mountain man in a saloon so long ago. She lived another 3 years, spending her time teaching her grandchildren to read and telling them stories about their grandfather. She never remarried, never even considered it. Harrison had been her one great love, and she was content to wait until they could be together again. On a warm spring morning, with wildflowers blooming in the meadow and birds singing in the pine trees, Scarlett Rose Thorne took her last breath. She was surrounded by her children and grandchildren in the bedroom where she had spent countless nights wrapped in Harrison's arms. Her last words were, "Tell him I am coming. Tell him to save me a spot by the fire." They buried her beside Harrison, and on the shared headstone, Henry carved words that captured the essence of their story: Scarlett Rose Thorne and Harrison Thorne. She was a saloon girl. He was a mountain man. They said no decent man wants a saloon girl. He said, "Then call me Indecent." Together they built a love that outlasted judgment, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy of choosing each other, always. The cabin still stands, maintained by their descendants who visit each summer. The stream still runs cold and clear, and wildflowers still carpet the meadow in spring. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind moves through the pines, people swear they can hear singing, a woman's voice carrying melodies of love and loss in lives well lived. The people of old Tucson have long forgotten the saloon girl who left with a mountain man on a desperate morning. The dusty rose is nothing but burned timber and faded memories. The respectable citizens who once passed judgment have all gone to their graves, their names forgotten by history. But the love story of Scarlett and Harrison lives on, passed down through generations of children who grew up strong and free because two people were indecent enough to love each other despite the world's disapproval. They proved that worth is not determined by circumstance, that love is not reserved for the respectable, and that the bravest thing a person can do is choose hope when despair would be easier. In the end, they were right to be indecent, because their indecency created something beautiful, something lasting, something that mattered far more than the narrow judgments of small-minded people who confused respectability with virtue. They built a life of substance in the wilderness, raised children who knew the value of hard work and honest love, and left behind a legacy that continues to inspire those who hear their story. And if you travel to the high country of Arizona, to the mountains where the air is thin and clean and the stars seem close enough to touch, you might find their graves on that wind-swept ridge. And you will know, looking at those simple markers, that here lies proof that love transcends circumstance, that courage can be found in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the most indecent thing a person can do is choose love over reputation, substance over appearance, and truth over comfortable lies. No decent man wants a saloon girl, they said. But Harrison Thorne proved them wrong, and in doing so, he gave Scarlett Rose something far more valuable than decency. He gave her everything.